Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, August the 25th, and welcome to our commentary. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about this decision to cut back or to basically forgive a bunch of school loans and college loans and my opposition to it and why I think it's a very bad idea. We're also going to talk a little bit about the American economy. I have a post over at the American Thinker today about the American economy and the obvious signs that a recession is here. But let me begin by talking about what we like to call the red wave, and that has to do with the midterms coming up in November. You know, for quite some time we've been talking about that most of the projections are that the Republicans will do well in November. And in some cases, you know, people are talking about a big wave, in other cases, a red wave, sometimes a tsunami, and all of this kind of stuff. And the reality is that we don't know for sure how big it's going to be. Now, I do believe that it will be a red wave. And I think the real key for me right now, the key factor for me is turnout. If turnout for the Republicans is very high, then I think the possibility of picking up anywhere between 25 and 40 seats, it's quite likely in the House. Very likely. Now, some people are talking about 70 seats. I don't think that's likely. I mean, I like to see it, but I don't think it's likely because there aren't that many competitive seats. Remember that in order to win 70 seats, you've got to pick up 70 districts, and you're going to have to flip a bunch of Democrat districts. And the reality is that in the House, there aren't that many competitive seats because of gerrymandering. I mean, the Democrats draw their districts to favor them, just like we draw our district to favor us. So it's not that easy to flip these districts. So the idea that you're going to pick up 70 seats, I've never quite bought into that. But I think 25 to 40, let's say 30 as an average, that would be good. That would actually give you a Republican, you know, base of about 235, 240 House seats, which would provide the basis for a pretty good majority in the House. So that's what I'm expecting. Based on turnout, I'm expecting at about 235, 240 seats in the House. The other issue is the Senate, and the Senate is always more complicated because you're running statewide, and you know, you're the focus of everything. And I would have to say right now, I like the Republican chances a good, quite a bit. I think if I had to bet money on it, I think the Republicans will pick up one or two seats, pick up New Mexico for sure. Nevada, I mean Nevada, not New Mexico. Pick up Nevada. And I think there's a very good chance that we could pick up New Hampshire. We could flip those two. I think Georgia is going to be very competitive. And I think Pennsylvania is going to be very competitive. But I do think there is a chance of picking up Nevada and New Hampshire, two states where the incumbent Democrat senator is under 50% in all the polling. But again, it all depends on turnout. And like my friend Barry Councilman likes to say, and he's an expert on this, he says all the projections go out the window if there's a huge turnout one way or the other. So if there's a big Republican turnout, you could see 5 or 6 pickups in the Senate. If there is a big Republican turnout, you could see 40, 50 seats in the House. So I like to be a little bit more conservative. I like to say, well, maybe we'll pick up 25 or 30 in the House. Maybe we'll pick up 1 or 2 in the Senate. Either way, you're going to control the Senate. And as we're seeing with this, you know, with so many of the things that are passing 50-50, having control of the Senate, if the Republicans had had control of the Senate, Build Back Better would have never passed. The Inflation Reduction Act would have never passed. So having a 50-50 Senate with a Democrat vice president is technically a majority for the Democrats at this point. So we have to make sure that we get the Senate back for judges and for reconciliation and for many of these, you know, 50-50 or very close elections. If we had 51 votes, a lot of this stuff would have never happened. And we have got to figure out some way of winning the Senate. I think we will, but it's going to be competitive. That's all I can say. And the key is get out and vote. That's the key. Get out and vote. Now, let me say something else, too, about the red wave. One of the problems that we have in the country today is that there's simply too many polling places. I mean, there's just too many people taking polls. And I honestly don't know how they get to people. I don't know how you contact people in a country where few people have landlines and where most people don't answer the phone if they don't know who's calling. So, when I get a call on my cell phone or even in my landline, I still have a landline. When I get a call in my landline and I don't recognize who's calling, I just let it go to voicemail because I don't want to take it. I don't want to take it. It's even worse with my cell phone. I don't take anything that I don't recognize. So, in order to do a poll, the pollster has to call so many people that it becomes very expensive, and it really becomes a problem as to how good of a sample are you going to get. I remember a few years ago talking to John Zogby, who he runs that organization, Zogby International, and they do a lot of polling. And he was telling me that the marketplace has changed. It used to be 30 years ago, you would call people at their home and you get to talk to them in their landline. Now it's impossible because nobody has a landline and nobody answers their cell phones unless they know who's calling. So it is much more difficult to poll. The other thing, too, that becomes very complicated and very confusing for people following the news is that there's three kinds of polls. And I think you need to pay attention to this. There's three kinds of polls. You've got polling done based on adults, where they just simply, you go down to the end of the poll and it usually says methodology, right? Well, if it says adults, then that's really worthless when you think about it, because there's no way of knowing who these adults are. Then the next category is registered voters. Well, those are just people who are registered. But remember, half of them don't even vote in these midterms. So the only reliably consistent, or at least worthwhile poll to look at is a poll based on likely voters. Rasmussen, for example, does likely voters. That's one of the reasons I like them. But likely voters, there's a reality about likely voters. It's more expensive to contact likely voters because you got to go through more time and more phone calls. So again, be careful with polling data. It's going to tell you a lot of different things. But if you're going to pay attention to any poll, check out polls based on likely voters. Those are the ones that are going to be the most reliable, or at least have not necessarily reliable, but have more certainty that the information is correct. So I do believe there's going to be a red wave, but I don't take anything for granted. And as I said before, get out and vote. It's all about turnout. That's what it's all about. Well, I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about the U.S. economy. Look, we are in a recession, whether they want to say that at the White House or not. We are in a recession. We've now had 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, but the situation is getting a lot worse than that. Companies are now making it very clear that they're going to lay off people. Companies are going to be cutting back on hiring, and those are usually signs that there is a recession. Also, the real estate market is changing. Homes are taking longer to sell than they used to. So we are slowly creeping into a recession, whether the White House wants to call it that or whatever they want to call it, that's okay. So what that means is that we are heading into a recession. And a recession usually means you could lose your job, or if you have a business, your customers are not going to be buying as much. It also means that you're going to have more homes that are repossessed. It means that more automobiles are going to be repossessed. I was listening to an interview with a gentleman who works with a credit company, and that's exactly what he was saying. They have seen an increase in the number of homes being repossessed and in the number of automobiles being repossessed because people obviously cannot keep up with the payment. So yes, we're in a recession, and that's the way it's going to be. Well, President Biden's college cancellation plan, whatever he wants to call it, is, in my opinion, a disaster economically. But it's interesting because it's dividing the Democrats. Have you noticed that? The Democrats are starting to show their divisions here. Some Democrats, if you represent a safe district, a safe Democrat district, then you're probably saying he didn't do enough. But if you're a Democrat in a competitive election, then you're coming out like the senator from Nevada, and she's saying, well, I don't like it because it doesn't address the real issue. The real issue is the cost of tuition. Well, that's true. The tuition is a a problem. My problem with what President Biden just did, my problem is on constitutional grounds. I would like to see the attorney general here in Texas or the attorney general of a few states get together and sue the president in the courts, basically challenging his authority to cancel debt. I don't think he can do it. I mean, a year ago, Speaker Pelosi said he couldn't do it on his own. He would have to go to Congress. Now, that's what she was saying a year ago. Now, today, I'm not sure what she's saying, but a year ago, she was correct. The president of the United States doesn't have this authority. And I really believe, I like to see a couple of states challenge him in the courts because I think they can stop him from doing something like this. You know, the president of the United States cannot do this. This can only be done by the Congress. And again, I like to see a few states challenge him on that. I just don't think he can do it. That's just my feeling. It's very similar to DACA. Remember DACA? My problem with DACA is that I didn't think President Obama had the authority to legalize 1 million people. That was my challenge. It wasn't necessarily, I wasn't necessarily against legalizing some dreamers. I understand their situation. Many were brought here when they were kids and all of that. So I was willing to contemplate some kind of legalization, but it had to be done by the Congress, not by an executive order. And that's kind of the way I feel about this particular decision by President Biden. Well, a couple of things on this day in history. 1914, that's 108 years ago, the Panama Canal was opened. You know, it took a long time to build that thing. You know, I think it took over 30 years maybe, or 20 years. And if you remember, they had to fight all kinds of problems, including yellow fever, that became a real problem for the workers there. But eventually, on this day in 1914, I guess the docks were open and the ships, started crossing the canal. And it's really an amazing, an amazing enterprise, the Panama Canal. And it's been expanded. It was recently expanded. So it's one of the great, engineering jewels of the world. And we remembered today Sean Connery. I'm sure you remember James Bond. Well, the original James Bond, at least the one that I remember, was Sean Connery back in the mid 60s. Well, he was born on this day in 1930. He died in 2020. And again, I still think of him as the best of all the James Bond movies. But there's one movie that I really like. One movie by Sean Connery that I love. And that's Red Hunt, or the Red October Hunt, based on that book about the Soviet submarine captain. I thought he was great in that movie. I thought he was just perfectly casted for that movie as the Soviet submarine captain who was, trying to flee to the West. So Sean Connery, born on this day in 1930. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later.